Hey guys, tonight we begin with the charming, cosy, heartwarming world of Victorian factory life. You know, that magical era when children worked 12-hour shifts and the air quality could legally be classified as a weapon. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first day as a Victorian factory worker begins the same way all Victorian tragedies begin, with a bell. Not a gentle good morning chime. No. This bell rings like it's personally offended that you're still alive. It's pitch black outside. The sun has refused to participate. Even the rats are still asleep and they work night shifts. But you? You must rise. You peel yourself off a straw mattress that feels like someone angrily stuffed a potato sack with regrets and sharp objects. Your back cracks like an old wooden door. Your joints send you a message that translates roughly to, "Why are we doing this?" Your breath forms a white cloud in the freezing air. That's right. You are so cold you are producing your own special effects. Your breakfast is yesterday's bread, which has achieved the density of a medieval weapon. You try to bite it, and your teeth file an official protest. No butter, no jam, no coffee, because caffeine is a luxury for the rich and the French. Victorian workers started their day fueled entirely by survival instinct and pure negativity. You get dressed in clothes that can only be described as historically itchy. Every fibre feels like it was designed by someone who hated skin. They're stiff, they're heavy, and they smell like the combined sins of every person who wore them before you. You step outside, ready to embrace the day, and immediately reconsider every choice that led you here. The air is a charming blend of soot, coal smoke, damp fog, and something that can only be described as urban sadness. Someone coughs nearby, and the sound echoes like a haunted accordion. A child runs past you already late for their 12-hour shift, because in Victorian England, childhood was more of a rumour than a reality. The street is slick with slime you don't want to identify. Your shoes, which are essentially cardboard lined with hope, soak through instantly. Congratulations, your day begins with trench foot light. Then the factory bell rings again, this time louder, like it has taken your reluctance personally. You start walking faster, not because you want to, but because Victorian foremen are legally allowed to yell at you until your soul leaves your body. And the worst part? You haven't even reached the factory yet. You haven't seen the machines. You haven't inhaled the dust. You haven't met the foreman, whose personality is unseasoned boiled potato. It's still morning, and already you're thinking, "No, I will not survive this. I'm going back to bed." Your commute to the factory is not a charming morning walk. There is no sunrise, no birdsong, no cheerful neighbour wishing you a lovely day. Instead, you step out into a Victorian street that looks like a deleted scene from a horror novel. The fog is so thick it has physical mass, the colour of wet cement, and it carries the delightful scent of industrial revolution and unresolved coughing fits. The ground beneath you is not a road so much as a mud and soot smoothie. Every footstep threatens to remove your shoe entirely, which would be tragic because Victorian shoes cost approximately 2 years of wages and provide exactly 0 warmth. As you walk, you encounter the local wildlife. Rats the size of emotional support dogs. They don't fear you. They don't run. They simply look at you like, "Oh, you're headed to the factory? Rough." Even the rats pity you, and that should tell you everything. You pass rows of cramped houses where families of 8 live in one room, all of them sharing the same air, diseases, and questionable life choices. Laundry hangs limply in the damp air, dripping onto the street because sunlight hasn't visited this neighbourhood since the reign of someone named George. Children, who should be sleeping, or going to school, or literally anything except this, scurry past you clutching tools. Some are as young as 5. At that age today, Kids are learning colours. In Victorian England, they're learning how to avoid getting sucked into machinery. Adorable, in a tragic way. The closer you get to the factory, the darker the sky becomes, not because of clouds, but because of smoke. An actual man-made artificial night. Chimneys belch black fumes like dragons with a sinus infection, and after 2 minutes in this environment, your lungs feel like they're aging in dog years. As you cross a narrow bridge, you look down and see the river, formerly water, now an unidentifiable soup of chemicals, dead fish, and regret. It bubbles. Water should not bubble unless heated. You make a mental note to never fall into it unless you want superpowers or immediate death. And then, just when you think it cannot possibly get more miserable, the factory bell rings again, loud, metallic, and full of disappointment. Your pace quickens, not because you want to, but because you fear the foreman discovering you're late. The foreman is a man whose personality is 90% anger and 10% hat. By the time you reach the factory gates, your shoes are soaked, your lungs are compromised, your mood is low, and your spirit is gently leaking out of your ears. And this was just the commute. You haven't even started your shift yet. After surviving the Victorian commute, a feat deserving of a national medal, you finally approach the building where your dreams and spinal alignment will go to die. The factory. It rises out of the smog like a brick mountain designed by someone who really hated windows, oxygen, and joy. The structure is huge, imposing, and somehow manages to look both abandoned and overcrowded at the same time. The first thing you notice is the noise. You don't see the machines yet, but you hear them. A distant metallic roaring that sounds like a thunderstorm being attacked by angry kitchen utensils. It's a chorus of clanks, bangs, whirs, and the occasional scream of a steam pipe releasing pressure in a way that suggests it's also emotionally stressed. Your ears attempt to resign from your body immediately. The factory doors themselves are heavy iron slabs, the kind of doors you'd expect on a medieval dungeon or a high-security prison. You hesitate to touch them because they radiate the unsettling energy of something that has seen things. Terrible things. Things involving fingers. Once inside, you're hit by a wall of heat, noise, and grime so thick it practically has its own personality. The interior is dim, lit only by small windows that are somehow simultaneously filthy and cracked beyond recognition. Dust hangs in the air like it's paying rent. Workers move through the haze like ghosts with union problems. The floor is uneven and coated in oil, dirt, metal shavings, and substances you choose not to identify for your own emotional well-being. Every step feels like a gamble, and every gamble feels like a potential lawsuit, which does not exist yet. Your first instinct is to turn around and leave. Maybe run. Maybe relocate to a different century. But no. The foreman has spotted you. He's a man carved entirely out of scowls, stress, and Victorian misery. His job is to glare at workers until they speed up, and he is excellent at it. He gives you a look that says, "If you even think about going home, I will invent new forms of disappointment." You glance at the machinery, and immediately regret every decision that brought you to this moment. Looms, gears, belts, presses, all enormous, all loud, all powered by steam and spite. Every machine looks like it's one poorly timed blink away from removing an important part of your body. And the shift hasn't even started. Standing there, in the smoke-filled factory, listening to a metallic orchestra of doom, you realize something profound. You do not belong here. Your modern brain whispers, "Nope." Your lungs whisper, "Goodbye." And your heart whispers, "Is it too late to become a baker instead?" But it's too late. Welcome to the factory. You might expect, on your first day in a Victorian factory, some kind of structured orientation, a friendly supervisor, a pamphlet, a demonstration video starring a cheerful man explaining safety procedures. No. Absolutely not. This is the Victorian era. The only safety orientation you're getting is, don't stand too close to things that spin fast. Your training begins when a foreman points to a massive machine the size of a carriage and says, "Right, you operate that." That's it. Those 4 words are your syllabus, your handbook, your entire educational framework. You stare at the machine stares back, menacingly, and somewhere deep inside, a little voice whispers, "It's been a good life." Victorian machinery is not friendly. It is not labelled. It is not colour-coded. It does not have a helpful emergency stop button. It's a tangled mess of gears, belts, pistons, and steam pipes, all screaming for attention, and occasionally spitting hot droplets at you like angry mechanical llamas. Your job is to keep everything running smoothly, which is optimistic considering you don't even know what half the parts do. Perhaps no one does. A co-worker approaches you, an older man missing 3 fingers and the majority of his enthusiasm for life. This is your mentor. He shouts over the noise, "Don't let your sleeve get caught," then immediately turns away because, frankly, that covers most of the curriculum. You nod politely, as if this single warning will protect you from the 18 other ways the machine plans to injure you. You try to pay attention to the motions of the workers around you, but they move with the speed and precision of people who have long since accepted their fate. They grab, pull, crank, feed, push, twist, all in a sequence so complicated it might as well be a dance performed as a warning to future generations. The foreman walks by again, glaring at you with the intensity of a man who believes inefficiency is a personal insult. He yells, "Faster!" even though you haven't yet identified which part of the machine is the work part. You'd love to ask questions, but questions imply curiosity, and curiosity implies you're new. And if they know you're new, they might assign you to a more dangerous station, like feeding raw material into the machine affectionately nicknamed the hand collector. Every second you spend in orientation lowers your life expectancy. Your pulse rises, your palms sweat, your clothing becomes a liability, and your eyes dart around like you're waiting for a trapdoor to open. In this moment, standing before a monstrous Victorian machine with nothing but anxiety and finger counting as your guide, you realize your real orientation is not try not to die. It's try not to die yet. Now that you've survived orientation, which was essentially someone shouting, "Don't lose a limb," over industrial screaming, it's time to meet your new co-workers, the Victorian machines. These mechanical beasts are enormous, steam-powered, and built with all the empathy of a tax auditor during a famine. Modern machines beep politely, offer guidance, and stop automatically if you sneeze near them. Victorian machines? They operate on a very different philosophy, one that can best be summarized as, if it moves, crush it. If it doesn't move, crush it anyway. The first time you reach toward the machine with trembling hands, you notice the collection of warning signs around you. Not painted signs, those didn't exist yet. No, the warnings come in the form of your co-workers' missing fingers. One man is short a thumb, another is missing 2 fingertips, and the veteran working next to you appears to have lost something so long ago he can't even remember which part. Machines in this era were driven by leather belts spinning so fast they practically became philosophical concepts. One moment there is a visible belt, the next moment it's a blur capable of removing your sleeve, dignity and arm in a single swoop. You try to keep your clothing tucked in, but Victorian fabric has no stretch, no flexibility, and no interest in teamwork. If your shirt catches on something, it's taking you with it. You attempt to focus, feeding raw material into the machine as instructed. The gears grind, the pistons pump, and every clank feels like a personal threat. The entire mechanism shakes the floor in a way that suggests it is held together solely by rust, hope, and passive aggression. Occasionally, someone will shout a warning, like, "Watch your hands," or "Mind the gears," which would be helpful if you weren't already fully committed to keeping every part of yourself intact. The problem is that Victorian machines do not care about your commitment. They sense weakness. They smell fear. And you? You're producing fear at factory scale. At one point, your sleeve brushes just a little too close to a spinning cog. Time slows. You see your past life flash before your eyes, including memories you didn't even know you had, like that time you cried over dropping a sandwich. You jerk your arm away just in time, and a co-worker nods in approval, as if you've passed a very dark rite of passage. You hear that one machine in the corner is nicknamed the Nibbler. You do not ask why. By midday, you understand why Victorian workers never became attached to their fingers. The machines wanted them more. Take a deep breath. Actually, no, don't. Not in a Victorian factory. The air inside this place is not air. It is a hostile substance. A mixture, a cocktail, a Victorian smoothie of dust, soot, steam, oil vapour, and the faint aroma of everyone else's suffering. From the moment you walk in, your lungs file a complaint. Each inhale feels like you've accidentally consumed a handful of gravel. Each exhale feels like a negotiation between life and poor decisions. Breathing becomes a strategic choice rather than an automatic one. You look around and realise the atmosphere has texture. You can see particles floating. Cotton lint if you work in a textile mill, metal dust if you work with machinery, or coal soot if the factory is powered by a steam engine that looks one spark away from national disaster. These particles swirl through the air like they're enjoying their freedom at your expense. Within minutes, your throat is dry, your eyes are watering, and your lungs feel like a poorly maintained accordion. Victorian workers called this sensation normal. Modern doctors would call it, you need to get out of there immediately. But no, your shift is just beginning. Workers around you cough constantly, not small coughs, the kind of coughs that echo across the factory floor like dying bears. You hear deep, rattling wheezes that sound like someone trying to start an old lawnmower. No one covers their mouth because everyone is too busy clinging to consciousness. And if someone coughs something solid, well, that's between them and the nearest priest. The factory floor is hot too. Steam powers everything, so the temperature hovers somewhere between uncomfortable sauna and slow boiling beef stew. You sweat instantly, which would be fine if the sweat didn't immediately combine with soot to create a new element. Victorian paste. A sticky black coating on your skin that never fully washes off. Your lungs grow heavier. The deeper into the factory you walk, the worse it gets. By mid-morning, you're trying to conserve oxygen like a Victorian monk practicing industrial meditation. You've invented 3 new coughing patterns, and you're starting to see shapes in the haze. The machines? The foreman? Or perhaps just your will to live, leaving your body in visible form. And there's no escape. The windows are sealed shut because opening them would let the outside air in. And fresh air is a luxury reserved for people not currently sweating on factory floors. By the time you reach midday, you don't need a doctor to diagnose you. You need a time machine. This isn't air. This is the Industrial Revolution's way of telling you to go home. If you thought the air was trying to kill you, wait until you hear the soundtrack of Victorian industrialism. The factory noise is less background ambience and more constant, unrelenting psychological assault. It doesn't simply echo. It occupies space inside your skull like it's paying rent. The moment you step onto the factory floor, the sound hits you like a brick to the face. The machines roar, clank, grind, whir, hiss, and bang in a chaotic symphony that would make even heavy metal bands say, "Okay, that's a bit much." It's not just loud, it's aggressive, violent, the kind of noise that doesn't fade into the background, but becomes the background of your nightmares. Your ears immediately begin to protest. They try to fold themselves shut. They attempt to resign. They consider immigrating to a quieter part of your head. But Victorian factories have no quiet parts, only louder parts and far louder parts. Communication is impossible. If you want to speak to the person next to you, you must scream with the intensity of someone confessing a lifelong secret. Most of the time, they still don't hear you. The machines drown out every sound, including your internal monologue, which is honestly a blessing, because your internal monologue is currently screaming. You'll try at first to protect your hearing. You'll cover your ears. You'll tilt your head. You'll pray. None of it works. The noise goes through you, like the factory is trying to communicate directly with your bones. Victorian workers didn't have earplugs. The closest thing to ear protection was stuffing cotton into your ears, which is also what caused half the hearing problems in the first place. As the hours drag on, your brain begins to adapt, badly. You start imagining patterns in the clanging, like the machines are sending you threatening Morse code messages. One piston makes a noise that, if you listen long enough, resembles laughter. And that's when you realize the machines aren't just loud, they're mocking you. Your nerves fray, your shoulders tense, your sanity loosens, time becomes irrelevant, your thoughts blur into one continuous plea for silence. But the machines do not care about your suffering. They are fueled by steam, coal, and spite, and they will keep screaming until the end of your shift, or the end of civilization. Victorian workers often went deaf slowly. You're going deaf immediately, and possibly emotionally too. By the end of hour 1, you don't just want silence, you want revenge. Just when you think the machinery is the worst thing in the factory, something far more demoralizing enters your field of vision. The supervisor. Victorian supervisors were not hired for their communication skills or emotional warmth. No, they were selected for qualities such as chronic unhappiness, the ability to glare through walls, and a voice that could cut through industrial noise and hope simultaneously. Your supervisor materializes out of the steam like an underpaid Victorian ghost. His posture is rigid, his expression is bleak, and his eyebrows seem permanently stuck in the "I'm disappointed in you" position. You don't even know him yet, but somehow you already feel like you owe him money. His clothing is simple: dusty trousers, a waistcoat, boots that have stomped on many dreams. But what truly defines him is his authority aura. This aura radiates stress. Workers straighten up as soon as he walks by, moving with the speed and panic normally reserved for natural disasters. The foreman doesn't smile. He doesn't blink. He just judges. His version of encouragement? Faster. His version of constructive feedback? You're doing it wrong. His version of empathy? We don't pay you to think. He approaches you slowly, like a predator who's disappointed he has to chase his meal. You try to act natural, which is difficult because you don't know what natural looks like when surrounded by death machines. Sweat drips down your back. Your hands shake. You consider making eye contact, then immediately regret the thought. Eye contact is how he detects fear. When he finally speaks to you, it's not a greeting. It's a warning disguised as a question. Is that the best you can do? Your soul leaves your body briefly. He points at your machine and shouts tips that are not tips. Don't jam it, and keep it moving. You nod obediently, even though you have no idea whose fault it is when the machine suddenly decides it hates productivity and stops for fun. Around you, seasoned workers move with robotic precision, pretending they're not terrified. They've been here long enough to know that the supervisor senses weakness the way sharks sense blood. And in the rare event someone slows down, maybe they're injured, maybe their soul just left for a moment, the supervisor's voice cuts through the factory. Do you want to be replaced? The answer is always yes, but the paycheck says no. You realize in this moment that you could survive the noise, the dust, even the machinery. But the supervisor? He is the true villain of the Industrial Revolution. You might believe, as a modern human with rights and hydration needs, that a lunch break is a moment to rest, regroup, and maybe regain the will to live. In the Victorian factory, however, a lunch break is simply the period during which you continue working while chewing something vaguely edible. The bell rings, signalling this sacred window of nourishment. And by sacred I mean roughly 8 minutes, give or take how generous the supervisor feels that day. He never feels generous. The machines don't stop. You don't stop. Your existential dread doesn't stop. The only thing that pauses is your hope. Your lunch is whatever you could carry in your pocket without it liquefying. Yesterday's bread, now slightly fossilized, a cold, wrinkled potato, or, if you're lucky, a piece of cheese that costs half a week's wages and smells like it legally qualifies as a weapon. You pull it out with trembling hands, blow a fine layer of factory dust off it, and take a bite. Delicious? No, but it contains calories, and that's enough. Victorian workers didn't sit down for meals. Sitting would imply rest, and rest would imply humanity. Instead, everyone stands at their machine, hunched over like goblins, eating their sad lunches while avoiding moving parts that could easily turn a meal break into a medical emergency. If your bread falls on the floor, you face a moral crisis. Do you pick it up? Do you leave it? Do you cry? Do you accept this as a sign that lunch is over? Most people pick it up. 5-second rule? In the Victorian factory, it's more of a 5-second glance to ensure no rats beat you to it rule. The noise continues, so deafening that you can't even hear yourself chewing, which is a blessing because Victorian food does not make pleasing sounds. Your jaw works overtime, trying to break through bread that could double as a construction material. Meanwhile, bits of dust float into your food, adding a gritty crunch that no cookbook could ever justify. Occasionally, someone tries to exchange a small joke or weary smile with a co-worker during lunch, but the noise drowns everything out. Laughter is forbidden, not by rules, but by the environment. If you manage to grin, it's mostly because your brain is losing oxygen. Then, just as your stomach begins to understand that food has arrived, the supervisor stomps past and bellows, "Break's over!" Your soul collapses. 8 minutes have passed. Your potato is unfinished. Your jaw is tired. Your spirit is tired. And you now have another 10 hours of work ahead of you. Welcome to Victorian lunch. By the time the afternoon rolls around, your energy is gone. Not low, not tired, but entirely missing, like it packed a small suitcase, slipped out the back door, and moved to another country. Your body is now operating solely on instinct, fear, and whatever microscopic nutrients were in that cold potato you inhaled during lunch. The machines do not care. The supervisor does not care. Even time itself seems to be dragging its feet, refusing to move faster because it enjoys watching you suffer. Your arms ache from repetitive motions that haven't changed since sunrise. Your back feels like it's auditioning for a tragedy. Your legs are trembling. Your fingers, they're numb. And numbness is both comforting and terrifying in a workplace where losing a finger is considered a mild inconvenience. This is the part of the day when Victorian workers entered what historians politely call the afternoon slump, and what you might call the final collapse. Your eyelids grow heavy. You begin to sway slightly, not because you're dancing, but because gravity is trying to negotiate your surrender. Every minute feels like an hour. Every hour feels like a personal attack. Your brain, starved for stimulation beyond clanking metal and the foreman's disapproval, begins to drift. You imagine yourself somewhere peaceful, lying in a grassy meadow, sitting by a quiet river, or simply being unconscious in any decade that isn't this one. Then your hand slips. You jolt awake, and you're reminded that the machine you're operating can remove large sections of your body if you daydream too hard. Around you, everyone else is suffering the same collapse. Some workers move on autopilot, their eyes glazed over like overworked Victorian owls. Others are pale from hunger. A few look like they're communicating with spirits out of sheer exhaustion. But no one stops. They can't. The machine keeps moving, so you must keep moving, because stopping means introducing your limbs to industrial-era engineering. Your mind starts asking strange questions. How long have I been here? What even is time? Is this shift ever going to end? You check the clock. You think 3 hours have passed. You're wrong. It's been 7 minutes. Your stomach growls. Your spine compresses. Your soul evaporates. But still, the afternoon refuses to end. All you can do is keep working, keep breathing, lightly, the air is toxic, and hope the bell eventually shows mercy. Spoiler, it won't. Not for many, many hours. At some point in the afternoon, right when your soul has fully left your body and your muscles are functioning through sheer spite, you notice something horrifying. Nobody reacts when someone gets hurt. Truly. Absolutely nobody. A man several stations over catches his hand on a spinning belt. There's a yelp, a blur of motion, and suddenly he's missing a finger. A single finger. Not enough for a break. Not enough for sympathy. Not even enough for paperwork. because paperwork doesn't exist yet unless it's a bill you can't pay. He wraps what remains of the finger in a rag he probably washed last in the Crimean War, mutters something that is definitely not polite, and simply keeps working. You stand there in shock, clutching your fully attached hand, thinking, surely this warrants a pause. It does not. Victorian workers have 3 reactions to catastrophic injuries: a grunt, an insult directed at the machine, continuing the shift. Meanwhile, you stubbed your toe earlier and nearly filed for early retirement. Another worker gets their hair caught in a gear. The machine snarls, she screams, the foreman yells, not out of concern, but because lost productivity is the real tragedy here. They cut her hair free, hand her a cap, and she returns to work as if she merely spilled tea. You watch all of this unfold like you're witnessing an alternate universe where human pain is merely an annoying scheduling conflict. Burns are even more common. Steam pipes hiss like angry geese, and when they release pressure unexpectedly, they scorch everything within range. Arms, faces, optimism. Workers respond by swearing, shaking their arm, then getting back to feeding the machine because if you stop, it will absolutely find a way to punish you for your hesitation. Occasionally, someone gets pulled into a machine more seriously. The line stops for a few minutes. Not for rescue. No one here is trained for that. But for extraction. During this pause, workers use the break to stretch, wipe sweat, or take a bite of their bread rock hybrid from lunch. It's the closest thing anyone gets to a moment of peace. And your supervisor? His emotional response ranges from irritated to bored. He's seen too many injuries to care. In fact, he probably uses them as informal teaching moments. That's what happens when you lose focus. Back to work. You suddenly realize the terrifying truth. Injuries aren't accidents here. They're occupational features. Victorian workers build resilience. You build panic. And the shift continues. You've been working for what feels like 14 lifetimes. The machines are still roaring. Your body is held together by sweat and delusion. And your soul has long since wandered off to live a quieter life somewhere in rural France. But then, miraculously, the bell rings. For a brief, transcendent moment, you feel something close to joy. The sound is shrill and metallic, but to your battered Victorian brain it's Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Your entire body surges with relief. Your fingers unclench. Your spine uncoils slightly. You smile for the first time since childhood. The shift is over. You did it. You survived. You're free. Or so you foolishly think. Because as you turn to leave, already fantasizing about collapsing face first into your straw mattress, your supervisor appears. His silhouette blocks the doorway like a Victorian eclipse. He clears his throat in the way a man does when he is about to ruin your year. Overtime, he announces, not as a suggestion, not as a negotiating point, as a decree. Your smile dies instantly, falling off your face like loose plaster in a condemned building. Overtime is not optional. Overtime is not paid extra. Overtime is simply the universe saying, "Congratulations, you thought you were done?" Adorable. In the Victorian factory system, if the machines are running, you are running. If the machines need more output, you need fewer boundaries. So the bell that moments ago sounded like a celebration now feels like a practical joke. You return to your station with the posture of a medieval peasant being marched to the stocks. Every part of your body is screaming. Your knees wobble. Your wrists feel like they're made of molten candle wax. Your shoulders? Gone. They belong to history now. Victorian workers rarely complained. They couldn't afford to. You, however, begin bargaining with the universe. "If I survive this," you whisper, "I will never complain about Wi-Fi again." A bold promise, considering your survival odds are dropping like the value of Victorian air quality. The overtime drags on, and on, and on. The light outside fades. The windows darken. Not that they were doing much anyway. Your internal clock breaks. The only rhythm left in your life is the machine's dangerous heartbeat and the supervisor's occasional bellowing. Finally, after hours of extra labour that were definitely not in your imaginary contract, the bell rings for real. This time, no one celebrates. They simply shuffle out, too numb to feel anything. You walk toward the exit thinking one thing. If this is the best of all possible worlds, Leibniz and a Victorian factory worker really needed to have a conversation. When your shift finally ends, after enough hours to make time itself feel tired, you stagger out of the factory like a ghost who died from overwork and is now confused about how haunting functions. The air outside should feel refreshing, but this is Victorian England, so it mostly feels like breathable coal. Still, anything is better than the factory. Your legs are jelly. Not smooth, elegant jelly. No, more like the lumpy, suspicious jelly Victorian children dreaded at Christmas. Every step sends shockwaves up your spine. Your feet throb inside your shoes, which by now have absorbed so much sewer water they legally qualify as soup. The street is dark. Not nighttime dark. Industrial dark. A thick fog rolls in, carrying the smell of burning coal, rotting trash, and someone coughing aggressively 3 streets away. You take a deep breath out of habit and immediately regret it when your lungs threaten to unionize. The walk home should be simple, except nothing in the Victorian era is simple. The cobblestones are slippery, uneven, and seem to rearrange themselves specifically to trip you. You grip your coat around you, though it provides warmth only in the emotional sense. Children, yes, children, walk beside you. They also just finished their shifts. Their tiny bodies carry tools bigger than their hopes. A 6-year-old casually passes you, looking fresher than you do, and you feel shame. He's on his way home to help his family with chores after a 14-hour shift. You're barely managing to remain vertical. Rats scurry across your path, bold as ever. One looks you dead in the eye, and you get the sense that it is judging you. It probably had a more productive shift than you did. It certainly looks cleaner. You pass polluted rivers, collapsed wooden fences, overcrowded tenements, and the occasional man yelling at a chimney for personal reasons. Your body aches everywhere. Your arms feel like wet rope. Your throat burns. Your elbows hurt, and you didn't even know elbows could hurt independently. Halfway home, you start fantasizing. Not about food or rest. Those are long-term dreams. You fantasize about sitting. Just sitting. On anything. A stool, a crate, the curb, a damp Victorian cabbage. You would sit on anything. But no. You must keep walking, because if you stop, the cold will set in. And the cold in this era is the kind that tempts you into a lifelong nap. By the time you reach your street, your soul has filed for bankruptcy. You have aged decades. Your shadow looks tired, and this is only day 1. Victorians did this every single day. Tomorrow, you will never want to get up again. Unfortunately, you will have to. You finally make it home, or at least to the building where you temporarily store your body between factory shifts. Calling it a home is generous. Calling it structurally sound is optimistic. Calling it livable is downright fictional. What you actually return to is a cramped tenement room where privacy, comfort, and breathable air have all been removed for efficiency. The moment you step inside, you're struck by the smell. It's a complex blend of damp clothing, coal soot, boiled cabbage, and the faint but persistent scent of too many humans sharing not enough space. If you bottled it, you'd have a fragrance named Despair No. 5. Your room is small, so small that if you stretch out your arms, you might accidentally become part of someone else's family. Your bed is a pile of straw that crunches ominously, like it's storing secrets. Half of it is permanently flattened from generations of exhausted workers collapsing onto it. The other half has an unsettling lump that you hope is straw, but suspect is something historical. You share this room with several other people, siblings, parents, cousins, or complete strangers who wandered in at some point and never left. Space is a suggestion, not a reality. Everyone gets about 1 square foot of personal area, which Victorian society considered luxurious, because technically it is more than you have in the factory. Conversation is impossible, not because of noise, but because everyone is too tired to produce language. Instead, the room is filled with quiet groans, occasional coughing fits, and the soft scratching sound of a rat family in the corner who also pay rent by virtue of simply refusing to leave. You try to wash up, but the communal basin contains water that looks like it has already retired from cleanliness. Still, you splash your face with it, hoping it will revive you. It does not. It simply makes you wet and disappointed. Dinner is whatever you can afford, which is usually bread, thin soup, or something boiled so long it no longer remembers its original identity. You eat mechanically, staring into the middle distance like a person emotionally rebooting. As night falls, the room becomes colder. You huddle under a thin blanket that has the insulating power of a damp napkin. Someone snores. Someone coughs. Someone mutters in their sleep about the foreman. You wonder how long your body can endure this schedule before it simply refuses. And as you lie there, staring at the cracked ceiling, one thought drifts through your exhausted mind. If this is home, what exactly was hell supposed to look like? So here you are, lying on your lumpy straw mattress, your spine negotiating surrender terms, your lungs filled with enough factory dust to qualify as a new mineral deposit. You've survived your first Victorian workday, if we stretch the definition of survived to include still technically breathing but spiritually deceased. Now it's time to answer the question, could you survive as a Victorian factory worker? Let's review. You woke up to a bell that sounded like it hated you personally. You walked through a neighbourhood where every puddle was a biological hazard. You operated machines designed during an era when safety regulations were considered witchcraft. You inhaled air with the nutritional value of chimney soot. You ate lunch while actively trying to not get devoured by moving parts. You endured a supervisor whose hobbies included glaring and emotional damage. You worked overtime you didn't agree to, paid for, or mentally survive. You trekked home through a landscape that looked like the Industrial Revolution was losing an argument with gravity. You slept in a room so overcrowded it might legally qualify as a jar of human sardines. And tomorrow? You get to do it all again. Victorian factory workers weren't just tough. They were forged from suffering and necessity. Their bodies adapted to the noise, the filth, the hunger, the danger, and the complete absence of things like minimum wage, weekends, or basic human rights. They didn't thrive. They endured. Endurance was the only metric available. Modern humans, by comparison, can barely tolerate slow Wi-Fi, lukewarm coffee, or phone batteries dipping below 20%. Imagine telling a Victorian worker that people today complain when their office chairs don't have lumbar support. They would stare at you, stare at the chair, and then politely ask what support means. Let's be brutally honest. Your lungs, gone by noon. Your hearing, eaten by machines in under an hour. Your fingers, the machines want them more than you do. Your mental health, it evaporated at exactly 3:17 p.m. Your will to continue, left your body sometime between overtime announcement and the third coughing fit. You would not survive a day as a Victorian factory worker. And that's not an insult. It's a testament to how unbelievably hard their lives were, and how unimaginable that level of endurance is to us now. They didn't have a choice. You do. And you chose to watch this video from a warm room, on a comfortable device, while sitting on a chair that probably does have lumbar support. Congratulations. You already live better than a Victorian factory worker on their best day. Before the scandal, before the Senate's shaking fear, before Rome itself began trembling at the sound of drums in the dark, the Bacchanalia were gentle things. They were whispered gatherings, held at twilight among vineyards where the air smelled of crushed grapes and warm earth. These early rites came from the Greeks, passed quietly into Italy through the cult of Dionysus, later reshaped into the Roman Bacchus. and in those first years, the participants were mostly women, wives, widows, daughters, seeking what the rigid Roman world could not give them, permission to feel something wild within themselves. Imagine it. A hillside outside the city, lanterns flickering in niches carved into the stone, laurel leaves rustling, a circle of women dressed not in the heavy fabrics of formal Rome, but in loosened garments that allowed movement, breath, and escape. At the centre stands a simple wooden altar decorated with ivy, grapes, and a clay cup filled with the first pour of the year's wine. There is no frenzy yet, no ecstatic shrieking, no chaotic chorus, only soft singing, rhythmic steps, and a shared promise to honour Bacchus by stepping outside the boundaries carved by husbands, fathers, and lawgivers. For these women the wine was never just wine. It was a key, a loosening of the social knots tied so tightly around them since birth. The Bacchanalia were supposed to be moments of relief, of rebirth, of communion with a god who insisted that joy was not a sin, but a divine necessity, and because the rites were private, held far from the city, they became even more sacred. No men were permitted in the earliest phases. The secrecy wasn't sinister then, it was simply protection. But secrecy in Rome always breeds suspicion. These twilight rituals took root because they answered a human need Rome rarely acknowledged, the desire to be unbound, to step away from duty and discipline and into something softer, stranger, and more ancient than the empire's marble columns. When the wine began to flow and the songs drew the women into deeper rhythms, something within them stirred, a sense of union with Bacchus himself. Not as a god of drunken disorder, as later stories claimed, but as a liberator, a whisperer, a reminder that beneath the Roman facade, every soul still longed for the wilderness. And from this quiet beginning, an unstoppable movement was born. As the Bacchanalia grew, so did their magnetism. What began as a sanctuary for women slowly expanded into something far more electrifying, an invitation to anyone who felt the weight of Roman expectation pressing against their ribs. Young men curious about forbidden rites, enslaved people yearning for a taste of equality, freedmen rejected by patrician circles, and even a few adventurous nobles slipped into the gatherings. The rites were no longer quiet twilight ceremonies. They became vibrant, thrumming nights where wine loosened limbs, drums shattered restraint, and every social boundary Rome held sacred blurred into mist. To understand the appeal, you must picture Rome not as a city of marble, but as a pressure cooker. Public life demanded discipline, family life demanded obedience, religion demanded rigidity, but the Bacchanalia demanded only surrender. Participants believed that Bacchus could speak through ecstasy, through the trembling abandon that arrived when wine and rhythm combined. Those who attended said the god was not prayed to, he was felt. Entering a Bacchic rite meant stepping into a world where the divine pressed close, tasted on the tongue with every swallow of wine. The rituals intensified. Torches were carried into forest clearings. Vines wrapped around tree trunks like living serpents. The worshippers danced in spirals, their movements increasingly unrestrained as the night deepened. Some claimed they felt their souls leaving their bodies in brief flashes, joining Bacchus in a realm where mortal rules dissolved. Others described visions of vines bursting from the earth, of hooved creatures dancing beside them, of the god's shadow slipping between torchlight and darkness. And woven through it all was a dangerous, intoxicating idea that the Bacchanalia allowed participants to become more than they were. Slaves forgot their chains. Women forgot their duties. Men forgot the rigid expectations of Roman masculinity. In those nights, they were not defined by birth, wealth, or citizenship. They were simply humans in communion with a god who celebrated the pleasures Rome pretended to fear. Of course, not everyone approved. Neighbours heard drumming long after midnight. Strangers whispered about strange convulsions and cries they could not interpret. Rumours swirled, some harmless, some lurid. But what truly frightened the traditionalists was the growing belief that the Bacchanalia offered liberation Rome itself could not provide. and the more people tasted that freedom, the more they returned. The rites were no longer just ceremonies, they were escape, rebellion, revelation. A doorway into a world Rome did not control, and therefore a world Rome would soon seek to destroy. To the uninitiated, a bacchanalia appeared nothing short of madness. But madness, in these rites, was a language, a deliberate unravelling meant to draw worshippers deeper into the presence of Bacchus. The transformation began with masks. Worshippers donned faces of satyrs, fauns, wild beasts, and exaggerated human expressions. Smiling mouths stretched too wide, eyes frozen in ecstatic delight. The mask freed them. Once hidden behind painted terracotta or carved wood, they could shed the identity Rome forced upon them and step into a creature of the wilderness, a being ruled not by logic but by instinct. Music guided the descent. Flutes pierced the night with restless melodies, drums throbbed like a second heartbeat, and cymbals clashed in erratic bursts meant to jolt the senses awake. No orderly Roman procession marched to such music. This was sound designed to dissolve the boundary between self and spirit. Participants said you didn't hear it. You entered it. The rhythm swallowed thought, replacing it with something primal that demanded movement. And so they moved. Spirals, leaps, trembling motions, collapsing and rising again in waves, each dancer feeding off the frenzy of the next. Wine, of course, flowed without measure. But it was never just a drink. It was a sacrament. Each cup symbolized a step closer to communion with Bacchus, a loosening of the mind so the god could slip into the cracks. The Romans believed inspiration, furor, was divine possession. In the Bacchanalia, that possession became the purpose. Worshippers sought the moment when they no longer danced but were danced, when they no longer sang but were sung through. For a few breaths they ceased to be alone in their bodies. Something shared, something ancient passed through them. Animals were sometimes present, goats crowned with ivy, or small creatures released into the frenzy as living symbols of Bacchus's domain. Torches cast wild shadows onto trees, turning the forest into a stage where reality looked thin and unreliable. And as the rites reached their peak, some participants claimed to feel claws, hooves, or vines brushing against them. Hallucinations, perhaps, or the mind's attempt to make sense of overwhelming sensory overload. To Rome's conservative eyes, this was chaos. But inside the circle, it felt like truth. The masks allowed honesty without consequence. The music rewrote the boundaries of the self. The wine opened a gate. And when all these elements converged, worshippers believed they touched not insanity, but liberation. A freedom Rome could neither grant nor take away. And that freedom terrified the powerful. As the Bacchanalia expanded, so did the rumours surrounding them. The rites were no longer described as simple worship or emotional release. They became, in Rome's imagination, a boiling cauldron of forbidden desires. And to be fair, the line between spiritual ecstasy and physical ecstasy did blur during these ceremonies. This was not accidental. Bacchus was a god of dualities, creation and destruction, joy and madness, chastity and abandon. To worship him was to navigate the liminal space between the sacred and the sensual. Within the circle of worshippers, bodies moved freely, unrestrained by the usual Roman decorum. Participants danced close, hands brushing, breath mingling, limbs weaving into one another as though the entire group shared a single pulse. In that intimate darkness, shaped by wine, music, and the belief in divine presence, ordinary boundaries seemed to dissolve. Rome prized control, restraint, and hierarchy. The Bacchanalia erased them. A slave could place a hand on a nobleman's shoulder without fear. A woman could reject her marital silence and sing, shout, or embrace whomever she wished. For participants, this was not scandal, but liberation. To outsiders, however, it was something far more dangerous. Stories circulated of orgiastic frenzy, of participants losing themselves so completely that they did not remember whom they touched or kissed until dawn. Some accounts claimed men and women lay together in heaps beneath the trees, guided not by desire alone, but by shared possession, driven by the god moving through them. Whether these tales were truth, exaggeration, or political slander is impossible to know. What matters is that the Roman elite believed them. That belief transformed the Bacchanalia from a private cult into a perceived threat. A society built on discipline could not understand a ritual built on surrender. A society obsessed with hierarchy could not tolerate a rite where all were equal in frenzy. And a society terrified of disorder could not abide a festival where worship resembled wild passion under the eyes of a foreign god. Yet for the worshippers themselves, the sensual elements were not sinful or shameful. They were expressions of connection between humans, nature, and the divine. They believed Bacchus dissolved loneliness. They believed he fused his followers into a single ecstatic body. And in a world that rigidly separated individuals by class, gender, and duty, that sense of unity felt like a miracle. This merging, this dangerous intimacy, was the spark that would draw the full attention of the Roman Senate. As the Bacchanalia swelled in number and intensity, the rites no longer fit neatly into forest clearings or vineyard edges. Some gatherings moved underground, literally. Worshippers met in secluded grottos, abandoned storerooms, or chambers carved into hillsides where the echo of chanting wrapped around the stone like a living presence. These hidden spaces amplified the atmosphere. Close air, thick with incense, flickering torchlight casting monstrous shadows, masks staring from the darkness like spirits caught between worlds. Secrecy became not just a feature of the cult, but its lifeblood. The secrecy wasn't born of guilt, it was born of protection. Rome frowned on gatherings it couldn't supervise, especially ones where people of all classes mingled as equals. To safeguard their rights, Bacchic followers adopted oaths of silence. New initiates swore never to reveal what happened within the circle once the torches were lit. Breaking that vow meant exile from the group, or worse, divine punishment. Some initiates claimed that Bacchus himself shadowed the meetings, watching from the corners of the chamber, ensuring loyalty through a presence felt but unseen. Initiation ceremonies were elaborate. A newcomer entered blindfolded, guided by the hands of those already within the cult. Their first steps into the chamber symbolized leaving the rigid Roman world behind. They were offered a cup of wine, effectively a pledge of trust, and led to touch sacred objects. Vines, animal skins, ceremonial daggers, wooden masks blessed with oils. Each object represented a facet of Bacchus: life, wilderness, transformation, and release. Only after this tactile journey did the blindfold come off, revealing the circle of worshippers waiting, masked and silent, ready to welcome the initiate into their ecstatic fold. This growing network of secret locations and vows created something Rome feared far more than indulgence: unity. A unified group acting outside state oversight was dangerous regardless of its purpose. And the Bacchic rites had become a haven not just for pleasure seekers, but for those dissatisfied with Roman authority. Enslaved people dreaming of freedom, wives trapped in loveless households, outcasts searching for belonging. The chambers offered anonymity, equality, and the intoxicating feeling of stepping outside Rome's iron grip. But the deeper the secrecy, the more vivid the rumours became. Whispers of conspiracies, dark magic, poisonings, and even political plots began to circulate. None of it was proven. Much of it was slander, but perception mattered more than truth. And soon, Rome's perception turned deadly. By the early 2nd century BCE, the Bacchanalia had grown far beyond the quiet cult Rome once tolerated. Reports, most exaggerated, some outright invented, reached the Senate describing scenes of chaos, seduction, night-long frenzies, and secret gatherings numbering in the thousands. In a society obsessed with control, nothing was more terrifying than what it could not monitor. And so Rome did what it always did. When confronted with something that defied its rigid order, it panicked. The turning point came when a former initiate, driven by fear or ambition, approached the authorities with a tale that ignited wildfire. He claimed the Bacchanalia were no longer mere rites, but breeding grounds for treason, murder, and moral corruption. He insisted that worshippers forged alliances behind closed doors, plotted against families, exchanged illicit vows, and even committed crimes under the veil of divine frenzy. Whether he believed his own accusations remains uncertain. What is clear is that the Senate seized upon them with desperate enthusiasm. This was not truly about immorality. It was about power. The Bacchanalia had become a parallel society, one where senators held no sway, where women possessed unprecedented influence, where slaves mingled freely with freeborn men, and where individuals acted without deference to Rome's hierarchy. That terrified the ruling class far more than rumours of drunken rites. A cult that ignored social boundaries threatened the very architecture of Roman authority. And so the Senate turned the situation into a full moral crisis. They portrayed the Bacchanalia as a contagion infecting the city, a plague of hysteria that endangered families, virtue, and even the stability of the state. The rhetoric grew increasingly dramatic.